G'day, I'm Travers. When I talk about creating visual drama in our drawing, I'm talking about creating certain tensions, certain engagement points, certain ways of manipulating what I do that will draw the viewer in some way and hopefully create some sort of connection with some element of my drawing, whether it's what I've drawn or how I've drawn it. I mean, why we draw is totally up to us. And if I don't intend to show my work to anybody else, then I can really just choose to draw exactly what I want, how I want to draw it. But when I draw a scene, one of the things I want to do as an artist is to engage other people with what I've drawn them. My hope is that they will find some of the elements which I found pleasing or stimulating or interesting, also pleasing or stimulating or interesting. And I found the best way in my own head to think about this process in drawing is to think of it in terms of creating visual drama. I want to create something somehow which draws people in to what I've drawn and encourages them to linger and look more carefully at what I've drawn, almost whether they want to or not. That there is something compelling in my drawing which keeps them there. So in this video, I'm going to show you through some drawings that I've already done, 6 different ways I consciously think of as ways to create visual drama. And of course, most of these drawings actually engage more than one of these methods. But I've chosen them because I think they demonstrate very well each one aspect of creating visual drama. So let's have a look at them. And look, if you're finding my videos helpful and you haven't subscribed, please do. Please subscribe. Please comment. Please share. Please tell your friends who draw about my channel. It will really encourage me and help me in what I'm doing. Let's have a look at some drawings. The first way I think of creating visual drama in a drawing is simply through the interest, the ornamentation of the actual subject itself. In my case, the architectural elements of the building. There are some structures that are just so magnificent in some way that they can make very compelling drawings of great visual drama, such as this facade of the Pavilion Richelieu in the Musée du Louvre, or this view of the Hôtel de Ville in Paris with its wonderfully ornamental facade, several dozen statues, and the wonderful mansard roofs and decorative chimneys and turrets, as well as the street elements of these lamps and pedestrians. It's the sort of subject that makes you just want to look longer at it. We jump from Paris to Westminster Cathedral in London now. And again, a beautiful building with wonderful decorative elements, which I think creates a lot of drama between the decoration and the overall shapes of the building as well. Or we can go inside to the grand staircase of the Palais Garnier, where the overload of decorative ornamentation creates its own visual drama quite apart from anything else which is happening. It's a subject that really draws us in lots of ways. And finally, we have this scene of the interior of the main railway station in Antwerp. Incredibly grand architecture, but it also leads us into our second point, because not just is it incredibly grand architecture, but the shape of the architecture itself seems to direct us around the picture. So we have these arches that draw the eye around them. We have these lines coming in which focus then our attention down. Or if we've looked down the bottom of the picture first, we have a staircase that pushes our eyes up and to the sides. Because our second way of creating visual drama in our drawings is to choose compositions where the actual objects that we're drawing encourage us to move into the scene more. While my feet won't be walking up these stairs, certainly my eyes are led to travel up them and see what's at the top. In this less common view of St. Paul's Cathedral, the edge of the main dome here almost becomes a slide that I slide down over the top of and get drawn into the significant depth of our subject down here at street level. But also, the lines of the towers and of the rows of windows also draw us down to the lowest levels of this drawing, despite the fact that we're actually geographically quite high up at this point. Staircases are great because we always want to go up them. But sometimes other elements, such as this row of mirrors with their reflections, also lead the eye and therefore increase our engagement with the scene. Staircases don't just go up, of course, they go down. And so any element of changing of altitude invariably leads our eye up or down. And particularly in a scene where we have great distance as well, our eyes will tend to go from the closest point to the furthest point, which also increases the engagement of the viewer and gives them a chance to find other things that they may not have seen if they glanced at our drawing more quickly. And here we have another staircase. And we can see, in fact, that this scene uses our first point with the intrinsic interest of the architectural ornamentation. But we also have this wonderful stair that spirals down in this case. Our eye may come around the top of the staircase, but it will certainly come down the staircase and then it will spiral down. And the fact that we have these strong geometric patterns also draw our eye down to those points. And so we can see here both of the elements we've talked about so far at work, creating visual drama. A third way I consciously choose to create visual drama is in choosing scenes that have a strong perspective direction to them, because the cumulative effect of all the perspective lines is to channel our viewing to a certain point or to several certain points depending on the scene we're looking at. So in this dramatic view of the grand staircase of the Vienna State Opera, we can see straight away how our eyes are drawn upwards to the ceiling by these strong perspective angles. A lot less decoration in this interior view of the Dome of Sacré-Cœur, but the same principle of the perspective channeling upwards, which draws our eyes. Sometimes it's also an unusual perspective that helps create the drama. And so a building such as the Church of Saint-Étienne-du-Mont in Paris, which we normally see from ground level, to be looking down on it and to get a different view, as well as all the actual perspective lines that direct and channel our eyes, we have the interest of an unexpected, unusual way of seeing something which we may already be familiar with. Here we jump to the outside of the Vienna Opera House, but again we see these very strong perspective lines channel our view along the richly decorated side of the building and to this focal point here where we see through and past the building and we start to see the context of the streets of Vienna with people walking about. We have a view of an interior courtyard of the Chateau de Chambord with the wonderfully decorated roof. And in this viewpoint, there are these very strong perspective lines that funnel our eyesight along this left-hand side of the building, through the round tower and out the other side. And sometimes that's not always so good, because if our viewer doesn't come back into the picture, we've lost them. But I feel that although this is the initial directional thrust created by this composition, the eyes then loop back at the ceiling through all the decorative elements that we see there. And then we get this loop of being channeled through and up, and then we maybe follow down this chimney. And I think it's a very dynamic composition because it creates a lot of visual tension and drama which engages the viewer. And here we have a more detailed view of some of the decorative elements on the roof. And again, we have the perspective shooting right up and narrowing that draws the eye to where all these lines are going to combine. But we also have these wonderful buttresses splaying out around the tower. And so our eyes both follow around the curve, but also follow the individual curves of the individual buttresses. And so there's an incredible amount, when you add the decorative elements to those, to engage our viewing. And we also see at work here elements of the fourth way that I think about creating visual interest, which is through strong tonal contrast. With this contrast between these dark shadows, some of the decorative elements on the building, and the strong light of the direct sunlight on the light stone. Because my fourth point is that we can use strong tonal contrasts again to direct and to move the direction of where people viewing our drawing go. So with this building, it's defined by these buildings on each side in shadow, and because there's strong shadow, strong contrast, it picks out all of these architectural elements and emphasizes the repeated columns and pilasters, caryatides, sculptures, balustrades and other decorative elements. But we also have the very strong contrast of this closest object, the lamp and the people sitting at the base of it as well. And that brings our attention onto this, despite the fact that it's a fairly complex object in front of a fairly complex object. It helps us to see this object more clearly and therefore direct our eyes to seeing it and understanding what it is. And then we can start to bounce back and forth between this closest object and the further interest of the building. Of course, a nighttime scene also helps us to create strong tonal contrast. We have the lovely contrast of the darker areas further in the shadows and the lighter areas closer to us where we have more light illuminating the scene. But it also creates very strong shadows of those objects in shade, such as these railings and this bike and the front of the lady walking up the stairs. All of these objects highlighted by the tonal contrast encourage the viewer's eyes to bounce back and forth off them and to actually see what's happening. In this view of the Arc de Carousel at night, it's even a stronger contrast with the floodlit arch, and it really highlights the arch without the clutter of the buildings behind. These very strong perspective lines here channel our view up towards it. We can also look through the arches, but we're also encouraged by these columns to travel up and to view the statues and the other decorative elements on top. In this view of the interior of the Opera Comique in Paris, again we have these strong perspective lines, in this case curving perspective lines that take the viewer's attention through the scene. But we also have the strong tonal contrast of these dark seats, this darker area down here, and the dark shadows of this overhanging balcony, which make it easier for us to see certain elements in a very ornate, complex scene. In this Paris streetscape, again, the strong tonal contrasts mean that our viewing is channeled from these shadows into the light in the center, and then we follow the light up to its source at the end of the street. So it certainly helps us to engage and move through the drawing and to look at parts that really are in some ways quite simple and understated. And strong tonal contrasts don't have to just be at the edges of a scene. They can go right across so that we're not just peering through the columns, but we're also peering through the dark tones that I've used here, drawn to the light of the panorama in the background. The fifth way I think of to create visual drama is to create a scene that seems to instantly project a story. And this may often involve something which has people in it that we can connect with. So in this Paris streetscape, these shadows, as well as these perspective lines, the strong tonal contrast we have here, all lead us to these two figures. And they're not actually together, they're not holding hands, although it looks a bit like they are. But there is that sense of, where are they off to? Is it the morning? Are they heading off to work? There doesn't seem to have been much happening here at the cafe. So maybe it's morning and they're still setting up. That's certainly the feel I get. But to construct a scene which engages the viewer's attention in trying to work out what's happening here with the people, what are they doing, where are they going, increases their engagement with our drawing. In this scene in the Place du Tertre in Montmartre, we have the artist at work, and we have this prominent artist here. And again, the tonal contrasts help to draw our attention to these, despite it being a fairly busy scene. But we also bounce across to the lighter areas and we see the people and the perspective lines walking up and down. And so we start to engage with, oh yes, I've been here, I've seen this. It's in the shadow of Sacré-Cœur. There's cafes and tourist shops. There's artists at work. There's these cobble paving stones that make your feet ache after a while. And have us create a story of what's happening. In this Paris scene of one of the very few rainy day drawings I've done, it's very obvious what's happening. Here we have a young couple in love out for a day together. And again, the strong tonal contrast of their clothes with the deliberately lighter areas around them draws our attention, as well as the perspective lines coming down and angling in. So who are these young lovers and what are they doing? Or maybe this scene takes us back to a time in our life where this could have been us. And then this is the drawing that for me creates the strongest sense of story. Again, we have figures that to me look like a father and son, that looks like they're heading out for a day somewhere. You've got the strong tonal contrast between the figures and the space around them the shadows directing us to them, as well as this wonderful sense of they're going somewhere. And we might only know for sure that they're going into this street here. The backpack tells me that there's sandwiches and some drink and they're going out for a day together. So although this drawing is relatively simple compared to most of the drawings I do, it actually engages my attention and has me thinking about the scene and therefore looking at the drawing for a lot longer than a lot of my far more complicated drawings. So a sense of story creates visual drama. The final way I think about using to create visual drama in my drawings is framing, particularly where I have a main subject area of the drawing. By framing around it, we can direct the attention of the viewer to the object which is framed. In this view of the Church of St. Trinity in Paris, we have the architecture framed by the trees on each side and the hedging in front. This view of the fountain and St. Sulpice is also framed by trees and foliage on each side and by these Parisians or tourists having a pause in the shade. So in this instance, we're also drawn to the framing because we tend to be drawn to people, but then we also look past them to see the fountain and the Church of St. Sulpice behind. Sometimes the framing is as simple as the buildings on the end of the street and perhaps some shadow or shade on the road, creating a nice frame for a focal point. And sometimes the frame can almost be the main player. And we've all seen frames that were so ornate we spent more time looking at the frames than at the painting that was within them. But these two trees probably attract more attention than you would want a frame ordinarily to attract. But it also illustrates the second aspect of framing that I wanted to highlight. And that is using tonal contrasts to also frame or to emphasize some other framing that we've already employed, such as in this view, the Chateau Benedictine in Normandy. This way of creating visual drama can be seen in this interior view of the Palais Garnier, where this closer architecture is in fact shaded from the strong lights in the center of the grand staircase. And so we look through and past this woman into that space. If we stay in the same space for a moment, we have an even stronger sense of framing that almost literally is a frame with these dark shadows and the dark balustrade across the front, and looking through this to these wonderful sculptural candelabra, as well as the decorative elements of the staircase and the patterns of the balconies on the wall beyond. Again, the effect of this framing is intensified by the dark tones on it, directing our view to the detail beyond. We don't just frame through architectural means. We have this wonderful view of the Jardin de Renoir in Montmartre, where we're framed with all of the foliage and the shade and shadow in the foreground. Even these two figures are in the framing because they're in the shade, they're in the darker foreground area. And really what's being framed is the architecture in the strong sunlight. But there is a sense of story here as well. What are these two ladies doing? Are they friends? Are they together? Has one of them just got off this swing here? Where are they going? And then we look beyond into the lit areas and we think, oh, that's the Tower of Sacré-Cœur. So this then starts to connect with things we know about this part of Paris already. So again, we see quite a number of these ways of creating visual drama at work here. I want to finish with two very similar drawings of the same subject, but drawn from a different perspective and using different elements. Both these scenes of the Escalier des Princes in the Palace of Versailles have this rich ornamentation of the coffered ceiling above the staircase. And they both take us down the staircase, so we get this wonderful direction. Depending on our knowledge of history and imagination, we may create stories of Versailles courtiers, kings and queens moving up and down these staircases. And there is tonal contrast at work here. This darkened doorway here draws the eye through. And again, this darkened area under the staircase encourages us to see this part of the drawing more easily and therefore leads our eye through. In this drawing, in fact, down here at the bottom of the stairs is the brightness and the contrast between those parts of the building in shadow and the light coming through the windows creates the strongest contrast. And that draws our eye down the staircase to this part as well. But of course we are then drawn up in both cases to look at the rich ceiling decoration if we didn't start there. And my question to you is, which one of these two scenes has the greater visual drama? Which one would you linger at looking for longer? In fact, which one would encourage you to stop and look at the drawing at all? Because in the end, these are all very personal choices about how well these aspects of creating visual drama work or don't work. But it's great to have them in our head when we're choosing what we're going to draw and how we're going to draw it. It's not just about an accurate representation of a scene, but it's crafting that scene to encourage the viewer to stop and to look, to linger, to explore our drawing, I think is something that a lot of artists would really want to do. Next drawing you do, think about what is the visual drama here and how can I emphasize it or add to it in some way. So I hope you found this interesting, and if you haven't already subscribed, please hit subscribe and please hit notifications so you know when I post new drawings. I'm Travers. I'll see you next time.